Hi, I'm Jenna Whitmore. They screamed in my face that my daughter and I were freeloaders, draining their son dry, living off his generosity. They said this while standing in my kitchen. The kitchen of the house my mother left me. The house I invited them into when they had nowhere else to go. They called us parasites while sleeping in my guest room, eating food I bought, using electricity I paid for. But what they didn't know was that I had been documenting everything. And when the truth finally came out, it didn't just shock them. It destroyed the perfect image they'd spent 18 months building in our community. Have you ever been accused of the very thing someone else was doing to you? Have you ever watched people rewrite history while standing in a room you own? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rain hammered against the dining room windows that Thursday evening, each drop catching the amber glow from the overhead light my mother had picked out years ago. I'd spent the afternoon working on a logo design for a new restaurant downtown, my laptop humming on the desk in the corner of the living room where I'd set up my workspace. Lily was upstairs finishing homework, her soft humming drifting down through the old floorboards, a sound that usually made me smile but tonight felt fragile somehow, like something I needed to protect. Barbara moved around the kitchen with the confidence of someone who believed she owned the space, pulling out the blue ceramic dishes I'd gotten as a wedding gift from my college roommate. She arranged them on the table with precise movements, her mouth set in that thin line she wore when she was building up to something. Robert sat in what used to be my mother's chair at the head of the table, the chair I'd stopped sitting in after she died because it hurt too much to claim that space. He'd taken it the second week they moved in. And I'd said nothing, swallowing the discomfort like I'd learned to swallow so many things in this marriage. Tyler wasn't home yet. He'd texted an hour ago saying he was closing a deal and would be late, which meant he'd walk in after whatever his parents had planned was already in motion. That was his pattern. Show up after the hard conversations started, shrug helplessly, claim he didn't know things had gotten so tense. I used to think it was bad timing. Now I knew it was strategy. The roast chicken Barbara pulled from the oven smelled good. Herbs and garlic filling the house with the kind of warmth that should have felt comforting, but instead made my shoulders tight. She'd been cooking more lately, elaborate meals that she'd mention casually to neighbors when they passed by, making sure everyone knew she was taking care of this household. Never mind that she used groceries I'd bought, in a kitchen I maintained, serving food on a table my grandmother had refinished by hand. Vanessa arrived just as Barbara was setting down the serving dishes, breezing through the front door without knocking, shaking rain from her designer coat. She kicked off her heels by the entrance and padded into the dining room in stockinged feet, immediately going to kiss her mother's cheek. She glanced at me with that quick up-and-down assessment she always did, her eyes taking in my worn cardigan, and the loose bun I'd thrown my hair into after a day of work. I saw her small smirk, the one that said she'd tallied up my worth and found it wanting. I called Lily down for dinner, listening to her small feet on the stairs, and felt that familiar protective surge when she entered the room. She was wearing her favorite purple sweatshirt, the one with the sparkly unicorn that was starting to fade from too many washes. Barbara's eyes flicked over it with barely concealed disapproval. She'd mentioned before that Lily should dress more nicely for family dinners, as if my 7-year-old needed to perform for the privilege of eating in her own home. We sat down, the scrape of chairs against the hardwood filling the silence. Robert carved the chicken with theatrical precision, playing the patriarch role he'd assigned himself. Barbara passed dishes with commentary about how she'd used a recipe from her grandmother, conveniently forgetting that she'd asked me to buy all the ingredients that morning. Vanessa scrolled through her phone intermittently, occasionally showing Barbara something that would make them both smile in that exclusive way that left everyone else outside the moment. The conversation stayed surface level through the first course. Weather talk, Vanessa's plans to redecorate her guest bathroom, Robert's opinions on the new construction happening 2 streets over. I focused on cutting Lily's chicken into smaller pieces, making sure she had enough vegetables, playing the role I'd perfected over 8 years of these family dinners where I was present, but somehow never quite included. It was Barbara who shifted the energy. She set down her fork with a soft clink and looked directly at me, her expression sliding into something that almost looked like concern but had sharp edges underneath. "Jenna, Robert and I have been talking," and we think it's time we address some things. For the good of this family. I felt my spine straighten automatically, that animal instinct that knows when danger is circling. I kept my face neutral, and took a sip of water from the glass that had belonged to my mother's everyday set. What things? Robert cleared his throat, the sound heavy and authoritative. We've been here for 1.5 years now, and we've watched how things operate in this household. We've tried to be patient, tried to give you time to adjust, but frankly, we're concerned about Tyler's well-being. Something cold settled in my chest. Tyler's well-being. I could see where this was heading, could feel the shape of it before they even finished constructing the accusation. My well-being? I asked carefully. Vanessa jumped in, her voice taking on that pseudo-therapeutic tone she'd adopted since reading a few self-help books. We all know marriage is hard, Jenna. And we're not trying to attack you. But Tyler works so hard he's constantly stressed. And we have to ask ourselves why. We have to look at the patterns. I set down my own fork, folding my hands in my lap where they couldn't see them shaking. What patterns are you seeing? Barbara leaned forward, and I recognized the expression now. It was the same one she'd worn when she sold houses, when she was moving in for a close, making someone believe they needed something they didn't. This house requires a lot of upkeep. Tyler is carrying the financial burden of this entire family. And we've noticed that you've been working less, spending more time on hobbies, while he's out there every day providing for you and Lily. The words landed like stones. Each one carefully chosen. Each one designed to build a case I hadn't realized they'd been constructing. I work from home, I said, keeping my voice level despite the heat rising in my face. I'm a graphic designer. I work 40 to 50 hours a week. Robert waved a dismissive hand. Sitting at a computer isn't the same as real work, Jenna. Tyler is out there making sales, bringing in real income, while you're playing with pictures. Playing with pictures. I'd been designing since college, had built up a solid client base, had income statements and tax returns that proved exactly what I contributed. But they said it like it was arts and crafts, like I was killing time between episodes of daytime television. Vanessa's expression shifted into practiced sympathy. And we're worried about what example this sets for Lily. Children need to see strong work ethic. They need to understand that everyone contributes. Right now, what she's learning is that it's okay to depend on others, to take without giving back. My hands gripped tighter in my lap. I could feel Lily beside me, her small body gone very still the way children do when they sense adult tension. I wanted to send her upstairs, wanted to protect her from whatever was coming. But moving felt impossible, like the air had turned solid around us. Barbara reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of mine in a gesture that might have looked comforting to an outsider. We're saying this because we care, Jenna. We want this family to succeed. But Tyler has confided in us about the financial strain, about how the mortgage payments, the utilities, the constant repairs on this old house, it's all falling on him. And we think you need to step up. Maybe get a real job, something with a steady paycheck and benefits. Or she paused, her eyes preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Holding mine with an intensity that felt like a threat. Maybe it's time to consider selling this place and moving somewhere more affordable. Somewhere that doesn't drain Tyler's resources. Sell this house. My mother's house. The house she'd worked double shifts as a hospital administrator to pay off. The house where she'd raised me alone after my father left when I was 3. The house she'd made me promise I'd keep in the family, that I'd fill with the grandchildren she wouldn't live to meet. They wanted me to sell it. To give up the one piece of security I had, the one thing that was completely mine. I looked at Robert, sitting in my mother's chair. At Barbara, wearing the pearl earrings she'd casually mentioned were from Tyler for Mother's Day, but that I'd never seen a receipt for in our joint account. At Vanessa, who lived in a house twice this size in West Lynn, and had never worked a day since marrying Greg, yet somehow found the authority to lecture me about contribution. The words came out quieter than I intended, but clear enough that they couldn't be misunderstood. This is my house. Barbara's expression flickered, surprise crossing her features before she smoothed it away. Well, technically you're married, so it's Tyler's house too. I inherited this house from my mother. My name is on the deed. I paid the property taxes last month. I paid the water bill on Tuesday. I bought the groceries you cooked tonight. I've been paying the mortgage since before you moved in. Robert's face started to redden, that vein appearing on his temple that showed up when someone challenged his version of reality. Tyler has been contributing. Tyler, I said, my voice still dangerously calm, hasn't paid the mortgage in 14 months. Not since his last promotion when he decided his income should go toward investments. Investments I've never seen documentation for. That's a lie, Vanessa snapped, her sympathetic mask falling away. Tyler would never let you carry everything. You're making him sound like some kind of deadbeat. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping back. Lily's small hand found mine under the table, her fingers cold and tight. I looked down at her, at the confusion and fear in her eyes, and something crystallized inside me. I turned back to the three of them, these people sitting at my table, eating my food, sleeping in my beds, and felt the weight of 18 months of swallowed words rise up. I think, I said carefully, that it's time we all got very clear on the facts. This house was left to me by my mother when she died 5 years ago. The deed has only my name. I have paid every single mortgage payment since then, every property tax bill, every utility, every repair. I invited you to stay here 18 months ago when you said you needed a few weeks between selling your house and finding a new place. You've paid me exactly $0 in rent despite promising $800 a month. I've supported my daughter on my income while Tyler's paychecks have disappeared into accounts I don't have access to. So when you call me a freeloader, when you suggest I'm not contributing, when you tell me I need to sell my mother's house because I'm a burden, I have to wonder if you understand what those words actually mean. The silence that followed felt like something physical, pressing against my eardrums. Barbara's mouth had fallen open slightly, Robert's face had gone from red to almost purple, and Vanessa looked like she'd been slapped. Then Robert stood up, his chair nearly toppling backward. How dare you speak to your elders that way? How dare you disrespect this family after everything Tyler has given you? You were nothing when he married you. A girl with a dead mother and a house that was falling apart. He gave you legitimacy. He gave your daughter a father figure. And this is how you repay him? With accusations and disrespect? Barbara's voice joined his, rising in pitch. We opened our home to you. We welcomed you into this family even though you weren't what we would have chosen for our son. We've tried to help you, to guide you, to make you into the kind of wife Tyler deserves. And you throw it back in our faces with these vicious lies. Vanessa crossed her arms, her expression triumphant now. Tyler's going to hear about this. About how you attacked his parents over dinner. About how you're creating a hostile environment in front of Lily. This is emotional abuse, Jenna. And we're not going to let you continue poisoning this family. I felt Lily's hand squeezing mine so hard her nails dug into my palm. I looked down and saw tears on her cheeks, silent and terrible. She'd heard everything. Every word they'd said about me being nothing. About her needing a father figure, as if her existence without Tyler in it had somehow been incomplete. I'd been trying so hard to keep the peace, to make this blended family work, to give Lily the stability of grandparents and extended family. But what had I actually given her? A front row seat to watching her mother be diminished, again and again in her own home. I picked up my phone from beside my plate. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I was past shaking, into some place where everything felt very clear and simple. I need you all to leave. Now. Robert laughed, the sound harsh and disbelieving. Leave. This is our son's house. We're not going anywhere. You're the one who should leave if you're going to act like this. I pulled up my recent calls and pressed Nina's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. Hey Jenna, what's up? Can you come over? I asked. And can you bring your phone to record? I need witnesses. I heard her sharp intake of breath, the rustle of movement. I'm coming right now. 2 minutes. I set the phone down on speaker and looked at the three of them. That's my neighbor. She's also a mandatory reporter because she's a nurse. She's coming over to document you refusing to leave my property after I've asked you to. If you're not out of this house in 10 minutes, I'm calling the police and reporting you for trespassing. Barbara's face went white. You wouldn't dare. Think about what this will do to Tyler. Think about how this will look to everyone. I'm thinking, I said quietly, about what this is doing to my daughter. I'm thinking about what it means that you feel comfortable yelling at me in my own kitchen while eating food I provided. I'm thinking about how you've spent a year and a half telling everyone in this neighborhood what a burden I am while living rent-free under my roof. And I'm done thinking. Now I'm acting. 10 minutes. They didn't leave. Not immediately. Robert stood there with his arms crossed, his jaw working like he was chewing on words too bitter to spit out. Barbara had gone pale. Her hand pressed against her collarbone in that gesture she used when she wanted people to see her as fragile, as if she were the victim of some unprovoked attack. Vanessa had her phone out, fingers flying across the screen, undoubtedly texting Tyler, spinning the story before I could even catch my breath. The front door opened and Nina appeared, still in her scrubs from the hospital, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had started to come loose during her shift. She took in the scene with the practiced assessment of someone used to walking into crisis situations. Her eyes moved from my face to Lily's tear-streaked cheeks to the three people standing in my dining room like they were preparing for battle. She pulled out her phone without a word and started recording. Barbara's voice came out strangled. "This is a private family matter. You have no right to be here filming us." Nina's expression stayed neutral, professional. "Jenna called me. She's asked you to leave her property. If you refuse, that's trespassing, and documenting it isn't just my right, it's smart. So I'm going to stand here quietly and record while you make your choice." Robert's face cycled through several shades of red. "This is absurd. We're not leaving our son's house because his wife threw a tantrum over dinner. We live here. Our belongings are here. You can't just kick us out." I felt something settle deeper in my chest, something that had been forming for months, but only now had the words to express itself. "You don't live here. You've been guests who overstayed. And your belongings can be packed tonight or I can have them put in storage tomorrow, but either way you're leaving. Now." Lily's small voice cut through the tension. "Mommy, I'm scared." I looked down at my daughter, at the way she'd pressed herself against my side, her purple unicorn sweatshirt twisted where she'd been gripping the fabric. This little girl who loved drawing pictures of families with everyone smiling, who made elaborate place cards for dinner because she thought it made things fancy, who'd been trying so hard to win over these grandparents who looked at her like she was an inconvenience they had to tolerate to stay close to their son. Barbara saw my attention shift to Lily and took it as an opening. Her voice went soft, syrupy with manufactured concern. "Sweetheart, why don't you go upstairs while the adults talk? This isn't something children should be part of." "No," I said firmly. "She stays with me. And there's nothing left to talk about. You've made your position clear. You think I'm a freeloader in my own house. You think my work isn't real. You think I should sell the home my mother left me because it's inconvenient for your son that I have something that's mine. You've said all of that in front of my daughter. So now I'm saying something in front of her too. This is our house. You are not welcome here anymore. Leave." Vanessa's phone buzzed and she looked at the screen, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Tyler's on his way. He'll be here in 15 minutes. Then we'll see who's really in charge here." The words hung in the air between us, and I understood with sudden clarity what they'd been building toward all evening. This wasn't spontaneous. They'd planned this confrontation for when Tyler would be nearby, ready to swoop in and mediate, to tell me I was overreacting, to smooth things over like he always did while subtly agreeing with them that maybe I did need to contribute more, try harder, be better. They'd coordinated this. Nina shifted beside me, her phone still recording. "For the record, I'm documenting 3 adults who've been asked to leave private property and are refusing while claiming they'll wait for someone else to arrive to override the homeowner's decision. Just want to make sure that's clear." Robert took a step toward Nina, his finger jabbing the air. "You need to stay out of this. This doesn't concern you." Nina didn't flinch. Actually, when someone asks their neighbor to witness what might become a legal situation, it very much concerns me. And I'm going to stay right here until this is resolved. Barbara tried a different tactic, her voice taking on that wounded quality she used so effectively. "Jenna, please. Think about what you're doing. Think about Tyler. He's going to walk in here and find his family torn apart because you couldn't handle a simple conversation about household responsibilities. Is that really what you want? To be the person who destroyed this family?" The guilt came automatically. Years of conditioning making my stomach twist even as my brain screamed that she was manipulating me. I'd been raised by a single mother who'd sacrificed everything, who'd taught me that family meant showing up, compromising, putting others first. But my mother had also taught me that respect went both ways, that love didn't mean accepting abuse, that there was a difference between being kind and being a doormat. I thought about my mother in her final months, weak from chemotherapy but still fierce, gripping my hand and making me promise I'd never let anyone make me small. I'd promised. And then I'd spent 5 years breaking that promise bit by bit, shrinking myself to fit into the shape Tyler's family wanted, apologizing for taking up space in my own life. I'm not destroying anything, I said quietly. I'm just refusing to participate in my own erasure anymore. The sound of a car door slamming echoed from outside. Tyler's footsteps on the front porch were heavy rushed. He burst through the door with his tie loosened and his hair disheveled from running his hands through it. His eyes scanning the room and landing on the scene we presented. Me standing, with Lily pressed against my side, Nina with her phone out, his parents and sister arranged like they were the ones under siege. What the hell is going on? His voice was loud, demanding, already edged with the irritation that said he'd been briefed, he'd chosen a side and it wasn't mine. Vanessa jumped in before I could speak. She went crazy, Tyler. We were just having dinner and trying to have an honest conversation about finances, and she started screaming at Mom and Dad, accusing them of terrible things, and now she's trying to throw them out onto the street. With a witness she called like this was some kind of ambush. Tyler's eyes moved to me, and I saw the familiar disappointment there. The look that said I'd embarrassed him again, made things difficult again, couldn't just get along with his family like a normal wife would. Jenna, tell me she's exaggerating. I felt Lily trembling against me, felt Nina's solid presence beside me, felt the weight of 5 years of this house protecting me when nothing else would. I met Tyler's eyes and didn't look away. They called me a freeloader, I said evenly. In the house I own, while eating food I bought, after living here rent-free for 18 months. They said my work isn't real, that I'm a burden on you, that I should sell my mother's house because maintaining it is too hard on your finances. They said this in front of our daughter. So yes, I asked them to leave. And they refused. Tyler ran a hand through his hair again. That gesture he used when he wanted everyone to see how stressed he was, how much pressure he was under. God, Jenna. They're my parents. They're trying to help. You're being so sensitive. They just want what's best for us. What's best for us, I repeated slowly. Tyler, when was the last time you paid the mortgage? His eyes slid away from mine. That's not fair. You know I've been investing, building our future. I can't do that if every penny goes to bills. Our future. I looked at this man I'd married 8 years ago. This man who'd seemed stable and kind when my mother was dying, and I was drowning in grief. This man who'd proposed 6 months after her death, who'd said he wanted to take care of me, who'd moved into this house and slowly, gradually, made me feel like I should be grateful he'd chosen me. When did I become a charity case in my own life? Barbara made a sound of distress. Tyler, she's being cruel. After everything we've done, trying to help with Lily, trying to keep this household running while she sits at her computer all day. I turned to Barbara, and something in my expression made her take a step back. You've done nothing with Lily except criticize her clothes, and tell her she needs better manners. You've done nothing to keep this household running except cook meals with groceries I bought, and complain that the house is outdated. You've contributed exactly $0 while living in my guest room for a year and a half. So when you say you've done everything, what you mean is you've done nothing except make me feel like I'm failing at a game where you keep changing the rules. Tyler's voice rose. Jesus Christ, Jenna. Listen to yourself. This is my family. These are the people who raised me, who've always been there for me. And you're treating them like criminals because they gave you some honest feedback. Honest feedback, I said, my voice still quiet but with an edge now that could cut. They told me to sell my mother's house. The house she made me promise to keep. The house that's the only financial security Lily and I have. They said this while refusing to pay rent, while you haven't paid the mortgage in over a year, while I've been covering every single expense. And you think that's honest feedback? Nina's voice cut through the rising tension. I'm still recording. Just so everyone's aware. And I'm hearing a lot of admissions here about who's paying for what. Tyler spun toward her. This is a private conversation. Shut that off. No, Nina said calmly. Jenna asked me to document this. I'm going to keep doing that. Robert stepped forward, his bulk meant to intimidate. You need to leave. Now. Before this gets ugly. It's already ugly, I said. That's the point. It's been ugly for 18 months, and I've been pretending it wasn't because I didn't want to make waves. I didn't want to be the difficult daughter-in-law. I didn't want to be the wife who couldn't get along with her husband's family. But pretending didn't make it better. It just made them bolder. Tyler moved closer to me, his voice dropping to that particular tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable, while making me feel irrational. Babe, come on. Let's send Lily upstairs and talk about this like adults. My parents didn't mean it the way you took it. You're stressed, you're tired, you're overreacting to something that could be solved with a simple conversation. I felt Lily's grip tighten on my hand. Heard Nina shift her weight, ready to intervene if needed. Saw Barbara's calculated expression. The way she was watching to see if Tyler's approach would work, if I would back down like I always had before. No, I said. I'm not overreacting. I'm reacting appropriately to being called a freeloader in my own house. And if you can't see why that's unacceptable, if you can't understand why I won't allow your parents to speak to me that way in front of our daughter, then we have much bigger problems than I thought. Vanessa laughed, the sound sharp and mean. Oh my God, listen to her. She sounds like she's reading from a script. Someone's been watching too many empowerment videos. Maybe I have, I shot back. Maybe I needed to hear from other people that it's not normal to pay for everything while being told you contribute nothing. Maybe I needed to understand that boundaries aren't cruel, they're necessary. Maybe I needed to see what healthy relationships look like, so I could recognize that this isn't one. Tyler's face hardened, the reasonable mask slipping. You want to talk about healthy relationships? Healthy relationships don't involve calling your in-laws at 9 o'clock at night and demanding they pack up and leave. Healthy relationships involve compromise and respect. Things you clearly don't understand. I felt something crack inside my chest, something that had been barely holding together for months. Years maybe. The realization that he wasn't going to choose me, wasn't going to stand up to his parents, wasn't going to acknowledge that anything they'd said was wrong. He was going to do what he always did, make me the problem, make my boundaries the issue, make my hurt feelings the thing that needed to be managed. You're right, I said quietly. Healthy relationships do involve respect. So let me ask you something, Tyler. Do you respect me? The question landed in the silent room like a stone through glass. Tyler's mouth opened, then closed. His parents and sister went very still, sensing perhaps that this was a precipice, that the wrong answer here would change things irrevocably. Of course I respect you, he said finally, but the pause before it had been too long. And the words came out automatic, unconvincing even to him. Then prove it, I said. Tell your parents they were wrong to call me a freeloader. Tell them they need to apologize and pay me the rent they owe. Tell them that this is my house and they're guests who need to follow my rules or leave. Do that right now, in front of everyone, and maybe we can move forward. Tyler looked at his parents, looked at Vanessa, looked at me, and I saw him make his choice in the way his shoulders set, in the defensive posture he took, in the slight step he took that put him closer to his mother than to me. You're being unreasonable, he said. And I'm not going to force my parents out of our house because you can't handle an honest conversation. They're staying. If you have a problem with that, maybe you need to figure out what you really want from this marriage. The threat was clear. Choose this battle and lose the war. Back down or face consequences. It was the same threat I'd been responding to for years, sometimes explicit but usually implicit. The message that I was replaceable, that I should be grateful, that pushing back meant risking everything. But this time, standing in the house my mother had left me, with my daughter's hand in mine and my friend recording evidence beside me, I understood something I should have seen years ago. I'd already lost. I'd lost the moment I started measuring my worth by their acceptance. I'd lost every time I swallowed an insult to keep the peace. I'd lost the day I let them move in, and immediately start acting like they own the place. The only question now was whether I'd keep losing or start fighting back. Okay, I said calmly. Then I need you to leave too. Tonight. All of you. The room erupted. Barbara gasping, Robert shouting about disrespect, Vanessa calling me a psycho, Tyler demanding to know if I was serious. But underneath the noise, I felt something settle into place, something that felt like the foundation of the house under my feet. Solid. Mine. Unmovable. I pulled out my phone and dialed. When the dispatcher answered, I said clearly, I need police assistance. I have 4 adults refusing to leave my property after I've asked them to go. The address is 214 Laurelhurst Drive. Tyler's face went white. You didn't. Jenna, you did not just call the cops on my parents. I did, I said. Because they're trespassing. Because they've been told to leave and refuse. Because I'm done asking nicely. Barbara burst into tears, the loud theatrical kind meant to make me feel like a monster. Tyler immediately went to her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders, shooting me a look of pure fury. His father stood rigid, fists clenched at his sides. Vanessa recorded the whole thing on her phone, probably already planning how she'd edit it to make me look unstable. Nina moved closer to me, her own phone still recording. You're doing the right thing, she murmured. Don't let them make you doubt it. The next 10 minutes were chaos. Barbara sobbing, Robert alternating between yelling threats about lawyers and custody, and trying to physically block the doorway, Tyler pacing and swearing, Vanessa narrating the drama for her phone like she was streaming content. I stood in the center of it, holding Lily, feeling strangely calm in the eye of their storm. When the police knocked, it was Robert who answered, immediately launching into an explanation about his son's unstable wife, about how this was a mental health crisis, about how they lived here and had every right to be here. The 2 officers, one older with gray at his temples and one younger with a patient expression, listened politely and then asked to speak to the homeowner. That's me, I said, stepping forward. Officer Martinez, according to his nameplate, pulled out a notebook. Ma'am, can you explain the situation? I own this house. It was left to me by my mother 5 years ago. My deed has only my name on it. These people, I gestured to Tyler's parents and sister, have been staying here as guests. Tonight they called me a freeloader in my own home, and I asked them to leave. They refused. My husband also refused to leave when I asked him to. I'd like them removed from my property. Officer Martinez looked at Tyler. Sir, is your name on the deed? Tyler's jaw worked. No, but I'm her husband. I live here. This is my home too. Oregon is not a community property state for real estate acquired before marriage, Officer Martinez said neutrally. If her name is on the deed and yours isn't, she has the legal right to determine who stays or goes. This is insane, Tyler said, his voice rising. You can't seriously be taking her side. She's having some kind of breakdown. Look at her, she's being completely irrational. The younger officer, whose tag read Chun, looked at me carefully. Ma'am, are you okay? Do you feel safe? I feel safe now that you're here, I said. I don't feel safe with them in my house. They've been emotionally abusive and financially exploitative. I want them out. Officer Martinez turned to Robert and Barbara. I need you to gather your essential items. Medications, identification, anything you need tonight. You have 15 minutes. If there are belongings you need to retrieve later, you can arrange that through the homeowner at another time. Barbara's sobs intensified. You're throwing your own parents onto the street? Tyler, do something. Call our lawyer. Call someone. They're not my parents, I said clearly. They're his. And they have a daughter with a house 25 minutes away. They're not homeless. They just have to leave here. Vanessa grabbed her purse, her face twisted with fury. This is going to destroy you, Jenna. Everyone is going to know what you did. How you treated family. You're going to be a pariah. Maybe, I said. Or maybe people will finally hear my side of things. Either way, I'd rather be a pariah than a prisoner in my own house. The officers supervised while Barbara and Robert gathered items, Barbara making sure to sob loudly about her health conditions and her heart medication, and how cruel this was. Robert muttered about lawsuits and revenge. Tyler stood frozen, like he couldn't believe this was actually happening, that I'd actually done what I'd said I would do. When they finally left, Barbara pausing at the door to deliver one final tearful accusation about breaking up the family, Officer Martinez handed me a card. If they come back without your permission, call us immediately. You might also want to consider a restraining order if the harassment continues. And ma'am, he added quietly, document everything. Take photos, keep records. Something tells me this isn't over. I thanked him, watched the patrol car pull away, watched Vanessa's SUV follow it with Tyler in the passenger seat and his parents in the back. Watched my husband leave without looking back, without trying one more time to stay, without even saying goodbye to Lily. The house felt enormous in the silence they left behind. Nina finally stopped recording and let out a long breath. Holy shit, Jenna. I know, I said. My legs felt weak suddenly, adrenaline draining away and leaving me shaky. I know. Lily tugged on my hand. Mommy, are they coming back? I knelt down to her level, smoothing her hair back from her tear-stained face. Not tonight, baby. Not without permission. We're safe now. She threw her arms around my neck, and I held her tight, feeling her small heart beating against my chest. Nina wrapped an arm around both of us, and we stood there in the entryway of my mother's house, the three of us, as the rain continued to fall outside and the night pressed in through the windows. I'd just blown up my marriage, alienated my in-laws, probably started a war that would get ugly before it got better. But standing there with my daughter in my arms and my friend beside me, in the house my mother had fought to give me, I felt something I hadn't felt in 18 months. I felt like I was home. Nina stayed until almost midnight, helping me check all the locks, making sure the windows were secure, sitting with me at the kitchen table while I tried to process what had just happened. Lily had finally fallen asleep around 11, exhausted from crying, curled up in my bed with her favorite stuffed elephant clutched to her chest. I'd promised her I'd be up soon, but first I needed to make sure the house was truly ours again, that no one could walk back in and reclaim the space we'd just fought so hard to defend. After Nina left, I stood in the guest room where Barbara and Robert had been sleeping for 18 months. The room still smelled like Barbara's perfume, that heavy floral scent she wore too much of, mixing with the mustier smell of Robert's cologne. Their clothes were still in the closet, hanging neatly as if they planned to return in the morning. Barbara's jewelry box sat on the dresser, costume pieces mostly but arranged like they were precious. Robert's reading glasses were on the nightstand next to a Tom Clancy novel he'd been working through for months. And there, folded at the foot of the bed, was my grandmother's quilt. The one she'd spent 2 years making, each square hand-stitched with different wildflowers she'd found in field guides at the library. Lupin and Indian paintbrush, wild roses and columbine, all the flowers she'd loved on the hikes she used to take me on when I was small. She'd finished it the year before she died, given it to my mother with strict instructions that it should stay in the family, should be passed down, should be cared for. Barbara had been using it every night. I'd found it shoved to the bottom of the bed some mornings, kicked off carelessly. Once I'd found a coffee stain on one corner that she'd tried to scrub out, leaving the fabric pilled and damaged. When I gently mentioned that the quilt was fragile, that maybe we should put it away somewhere safe, Barbara had looked at me with those cold eyes and said it was just sitting in storage getting moth-eaten anyway. She was doing it a favor by actually using it. I picked it up now, holding it against my chest, and felt the full weight of everything they'd taken that couldn't be measured in rent payments or utility bills. They'd taken my family heirlooms and treated them like disposable conveniences. They'd taken my history and made me feel like I should be grateful they acknowledged it existed at all. They'd taken 18 months of my life and convinced me I was the problem when I started to push back. But this pattern hadn't started 18 months ago. Standing there with my grandmother's quilt, I felt the memories surface, the ones I'd been pushing down because acknowledging them meant acknowledging that I'd seen the warning signs and married Tyler anyway. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the quilt heavy in my lap, and let myself remember. 3 years ago. Thanksgiving. Lily had been 4, small enough to still believe that holidays were magic, that families gathered because they loved each other and wanted to be together. I'd spent 2 days cooking, determined to prove to Tyler's family that I could host, that I belonged in their circle even though I was constantly reminded I came from less, knew less, was less. The house had looked beautiful. I'd used my mother's good china, the set she'd collected piece by piece from estate sales. Each played a slightly different pattern but somehow cohesive, telling the story of her careful curation. I'd made centerpieces from branches I'd collected at Laurelwood Park, spray-painted gold and arranged with pine cones and cranberries. The turkey had been perfect, golden and juicy, surrounded by all the traditional sides plus a few of my own additions. Recipes my mother had taught me, recipes from my grandmother. Barbara had arrived first, sweeping through the door with Vanessa behind her, both of them wearing designer sweaters and bringing wine that Barbara announced was from their private collection, very expensive, not something you'd find in a regular store. She'd looked around the house with that assessing gaze, taking in the decorations, the table settings, the effort I'd put into everything. How quaint, she'd said, picking up one of the mismatched plates and examining it like it was a curiosity from a museum. Very eclectic. You've really embraced the bohemian aesthetic, haven't you? Tyler had been in the kitchen, oblivious to the edge in his mother's voice or perhaps just accustomed to it, so used to her casual cruelty that he didn't register it anymore. I'd smiled and said something about loving vintage things, about each piece having a story, trying to make it sound intentional rather than what it was, all I could afford, all I had left of my mother. Robert had claimed the head of the table immediately, the seat I'd thought Tyler might take since we were hosting, but Tyler had just shrugged when I'd looked at him questioningly and sat to his father's right instead. I'd ended up at the far end near the kitchen, jumping up constantly to refresh drinks and bring out dishes while everyone else settled in and started talking. The conversation had flowed around me like I wasn't there. Vanessa talking about her upcoming trip to Hawaii, Barbara discussing their plans to remodel their kitchen, Robert holding forth on politics, and expecting everyone to nod along. Lily had tried to show Barbara a drawing she'd made, a picture of our family all holding hands, and Barbara had glanced at it for half a second before turning back to her conversation with Vanessa about whether granite or quartz was more elegant for countertops. I'd watched my daughter's face fall, watched her carefully fold up the drawing and slip it under her plate, and felt something crack inside my chest. But I'd smiled and served the food and kept refilling glasses, playing the role of the gracious hostess, even as I became invisible in my own home. It was during dessert that things had shifted. I'd made 3 pies, pumpkin, apple, and a chocolate silk pie that had been my grandmother's specialty. I'd been up until 2 in the morning the night before, making sure the crust was perfect, the filling smooth, the whipped cream peaks just right. I'd brought them out with a small flutter of pride, thinking finally here was something undeniably good. Something even Barbara couldn't find fault with. She'd taken one look at the pies and asked where I'd ordered them from. When I'd said I made them, she'd raised her eyebrows in exaggerated surprise. Really? They look almost professional. Tyler, did you know your wife was so talented? There had been something poisonous in the compliment, something that made it clear she didn't actually believe I'd made them. Or if I had, it was some kind of fluke, an accident of luck rather than skill. Tyler had mumbled something about me being a good cook, but he'd been scrolling through his phone, not really paying attention, and the moment had passed. We'd eaten the pie. Barbara had taken small bites, making little comments about how rich it was, how she usually preferred lighter desserts, how her diet didn't really allow for this much sugar. Vanessa had pushed hers around her plate, eventually declaring she was too full. Only Robert had finished his slice, but he'd done so silently, without comment, like it was fuel rather than something to be enjoyed. After dinner, while I was in the kitchen cleaning up, I'd heard them in the living room. The walls in this house were thin, original plaster from 1924, and sounds carried. I'd been elbow-deep in sudsy water, washing the china by hand because it was too delicate for the dishwasher, when I'd heard Barbara's voice drift in from the other room. She tries so hard, doesn't she? I had to stop myself from laughing when I saw those mismatched plates. Like we're at some shabby chic flea market. Vanessa's laugh had been sharp, conspiratorial. And the way she kept jumping up to serve everything like she's the help. Does she think we can't get our own wine? She's just not used to entertaining people with standards, Barbara had continued. This is probably very fancy for the kind of life she came from. We should be grateful she's trying to learn. I'd stood there with my hands in the cooling water, a delicate plate suspended between my fingers, and felt the full weight of their judgment settle on my shoulders. They would never see me as equal. It didn't matter how perfect the meal was, how beautiful the house looked, how hard I tried. I would always be the girl from the wrong background who'd somehow tricked their son into marriage. But the worst part, the part that still made my chest tight when I thought about it, was when I'd heard Tyler's voice join the conversation. You guys are being too hard on her. She did a good job. A pause, and then Barbara's response, warm and affectionate. Of course, sweetheart. We know you're happy. We just want to make sure you're not settling. You could have had anyone, and we worry that you chose someone who needs so much help to keep up. Tyler hadn't defended me after that. Hadn't said I didn't need help, that I was doing just fine, that his mother was being cruel. The conversation had moved on to something else, and I'd stood there alone in the kitchen with my mother's china, understanding that in their eyes, I would always be a project, a reclamation effort, something Tyler had taken on out of pity or convenience. I'd finished the dishes in silence, dried each plate carefully, put everything away in the cabinet where my mother had kept it. When I'd returned to the living room, Barbara had been showing Lily how to sit properly, correcting her posture, adjusting her dress, explaining that little ladies needed to learn these things if they wanted to make good impressions. Lily had looked at me with confused eyes, not understanding why the way she'd been sitting wasn't good enough. That night, after everyone had left, after I'd put Lily to bed and cleaned up the remaining mess, Tyler had found me sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I'd forgotten to drink, staring at nothing. That went well, he'd said, stretching. Your pies were great. Mom seemed impressed. I'd looked at him, this man I'd married, this man who'd heard his mother mock me and hadn't said a word. Did she? Yeah, definitely. He'd kissed the top of my head, already heading toward the bedroom. Coming to bed? Early meeting tomorrow. I'd sat there for another hour, the tea going cold, the house settling around me with creaks and sighs. I'd married into this family thinking it would give Lily what I'd never had. A father, grandparents, an extended network of support and love. But what had I actually given her? A front row seat to watching her mother be diminished, again and again, while being told it was normal, expected, just the way families worked. Now, 3 years later, sitting in the guest room with my grandmother's quilt and the lingering scent of Barbara's perfume, I understood that Thanksgiving had been a preview. They'd been testing boundaries, seeing how much I'd tolerate, how small I'd make myself to fit into their vision of who I should be. And when I'd swallowed the insults and smiled and kept trying, they'd learned they could push harder. The move-in 18 months ago hadn't been the beginning of the problem. It had just been the escalation of a pattern that had been there all along. I stood up, folding the quilt carefully, and carried it to my bedroom. Lily was sprawled across my bed, her small chest rising and falling with the deep breaths of childhood sleep. I laid the quilt over her gently, tucking it around her shoulders, watching the fabric pool around her small form. This quilt had kept 3 generations of my family warm. It wasn't going to be used carelessly by people who saw it as just another amenity in the house they'd claimed. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lighting up the dark room. I picked it up, expecting maybe another text from Nina checking in. Instead, it was from a number I didn't recognize. The preview showed just the first line, but it was enough to make my stomach drop. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. I unlocked the phone and read the full message. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Tyler's parents are beloved in this community. You're going to lose everything. Your reputation, your friends, your marriage. And when Tyler files for custody, everyone will testify to what an unstable, vindictive mother you are. Hope kicking us out was worth it. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, the phone shaking slightly in my hand. They weren't going to let this go. They weren't going to quietly accept that they'd been wrong, that they'd overstepped. They were going to fight, and they were going to fight dirty, using every social connection they had to paint me as the villain in a story they'd been writing since before I'd even asked them to leave. Another text came through, this one with an attachment. I opened it with trembling fingers and found a screenshot of a Facebook post. Barbara had already posted, the timestamp showing she'd written it from Vanessa's house less than an hour after the police had left. The post was long, detailed, written in that wounded, martyred tone she'd perfected over decades of manipulating people into sympathy. My heart is breaking tonight, it started. After 18 months of trying to help my son and daughter-in-law, after giving up our own home to be there for them during difficult times, we were thrown out with no warning, no compassion. Police were called on us like we were criminals. All because we dared to express concern about our son's well-being. I never thought I'd see the day when caring about family was treated as a crime. Please pray for Tyler and little Lily, trapped in a situation we can no longer help with. And pray for Jenna, that she finds the help she clearly needs. The post already had 63 likes and 27 comments. I scrolled through them, my stomach churning. People I'd seen at the neighborhood association meetings, parents from Lily's school, members of the church Barbara had been attending, all of them offering sympathy, expressing shock, saying they'd always known something was off about me. They'd tried to be welcoming, but I'd never quite fit in. One comment stood out, from a woman named Patricia Landry, who I recognized as the HOA president. "This is deeply concerning. We need to discuss this at our next meeting. Behavior like this affects the whole community." They were already organizing against me, already building their case in the court of public opinion before I'd even had time to catch my breath. And the worst part was, their version of events had the advantage of being first, of setting the narrative before I could tell my side. By morning, half the neighborhood would believe I'd thrown two elderly people out into the rain for no reason beyond my own instability. I thought about responding, thought about writing my own post explaining what had actually happened, showing the receipts of unpaid rent, sharing screenshots of the degrading messages and the patterns of financial abuse. But I was so tired, and Lily was asleep beside me, and the idea of engaging in a public battle right now felt impossible. Instead, I took screenshots of Barbara's post and all the comments, saving them to a folder Nina had helped me create earlier titled Evidence. Then I turned off my phone and set it face down on the nightstand, refusing to let their words poison what was left of this night. I climbed into bed beside Lily, careful not to wake her, and pulled my grandmother's quilt up over both of us. The familiar weight of it, the scent of it that still somehow carried hints of my grandmother's lavender sachets even after all these years, helped slow my racing heart. Tomorrow would be difficult. The community backlash was coming, the legal battles were probably coming, the dissolution of my marriage was definitely coming. But tonight, in this house my mother had left me, wrapped in the quilt my grandmother had made, with my daughter safe beside me, I had done what 3 generations of women in my family had taught me to do. I had stood my ground. I had protected what was mine. I had refused to let someone else define my worth. And if that made me the villain in their story, so be it. I'd rather be the villain in their version than the victim in my own. I closed my eyes and let exhaustion pull me under, knowing that when I woke up, the real fight would begin. But at least I'd be fighting it from solid ground, from the foundation my mother and grandmother had built, from the home that had always been meant to be mine. The last thought I had before sleep claimed me was of that Thanksgiving 3 years ago, of standing in the kitchen hearing Barbara say I needed help to keep up, of Tyler's silence that had spoken louder than any words. I should have left then, should have seen it for what it was and walked away before they could sink their hooks in deeper. But I hadn't. I'd stayed and smiled and tried harder, thinking if I could just be better, do more, prove myself worthy, they would eventually accept me. I'd wasted 3 years on that impossible goal. I wouldn't waste another day. Morning came too soon, pale light filtering through the curtains and landing across my face like an unwelcome reminder that yesterday had actually happened. For a brief, disorienting moment between sleep and waking, I thought maybe it had been a nightmare. Then I felt the weight of my grandmother's quilt, heard Lily's soft breathing beside me, and remembered with perfect clarity the look on Robert's face when the police told him he had to leave. Lily stirred beside me, her eyes opening slowly, confusion crossing her features before memory settled in, and her expression crumpled. I pulled her close, kissing the top of her head, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "It's okay, baby. We're okay. Is Daddy coming back?" Her voice was so small, muffled against my shoulder. I didn't know how to answer that. The truth was complicated, messy, full of adult realities that a 7-year-old shouldn't have to navigate. "I don't know," I said finally, because I'd promised myself I wouldn't lie to her. Not about the important things. "But no matter what happens with Daddy, you and I are going to be fine. This is our home, and we're safe here." She nodded against my chest, but I could feel the tremor in her small body, the fear she was trying to be brave about. I held her tighter, wishing I could absorb all the confusion and hurt, wishing I could give her the simple, stable family I'd wanted so badly to provide. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, an angry insect sound that made my stomach clench. I reached for it with one hand while keeping Lily wrapped in my other arm. and immediately regretted looking at the screen. 17 missed calls. 43 text messages. My email had 68 unread messages from addresses I didn't recognize. And there, at the top of my notifications, was a voicemail from Tyler's lawyer. A man named Kenneth Bradshaw who I'd met exactly once at a firm holiday party 3 years ago. I didn't listen to the voicemail. Not yet. Not with Lily in my arms. Instead, I turned off my phone completely and focused on what I could control, which was breakfast and getting through the next hour without falling apart. We made pancakes together, Lily standing on her step stool at the counter, carefully pouring the batter into shapes. A flower, a heart, something that might have been a cat but looked more like a blob with ears. I praised each one, flipping them with exaggerated care, and for a few minutes, we existed in a bubble where nothing outside the kitchen mattered. But the bubble burst when someone knocked on the front door. Not a friendly neighbor knock, but hard, insistent pounding that made Lily jump and clutch my hand. I looked through the peephole and saw Vanessa standing on my porch, her face set in determined lines, her phone held up like she was recording. I didn't open the door. Instead, I called through it, keeping my voice calm. "You need to leave, Vanessa. You're not welcome here." Her voice came back sharp and clear. "I'm here to collect Mom and Dad's belongings. You can't keep their things hostage. That's theft. I have their belongings safely stored. They can arrange with me directly to pick them up at a mutually agreed time. But you need to leave my property now, or I'm calling the police again." A pause, and then her voice turned saccharine, the shift so abrupt it was almost funny. "Jenna, come on. Let's be reasonable. I know you were upset last night, but this has gone far enough. We're family. We can work this out like adults." I looked through the peephole at her phone, still recording, and understood what she was doing. She wanted me to open the door, to engage with her, to give her footage she could edit to make me look unstable or aggressive. She wanted me to play into the narrative Barbara had started building online. "All communication needs to go through my attorney," I said clearly. "I'm not discussing this with you. Leave now, or I'm documenting this as harassment." Her pleasant mask dropped instantly. "You're going to regret this, Jenna. Do you have any idea what you've done? Tyler could have anyone. He stayed with you out of obligation, out of pity for your pathetic situation. And this is how you repay him? By tearing his family apart? You're going to lose everything, and you're going to deserve it." I stepped back from the door, my heart racing but my hands steady. Lily was watching me from the kitchen doorway, her eyes wide and frightened. I smiled at her, keeping my expression calm even as Vanessa continued her tirade on the other side of the door, her voice rising with each sentence, the threats becoming more explicit. Finally, I heard her footsteps retreat, heard her car door slam, heard the engine roar to life with more aggression than necessary. I waited until the sound faded before turning back to Lily, finding her still frozen in the doorway with her hands twisted in her unicorn sweatshirt. "Come here, sweetheart." I knelt down, opening my arms, and she ran to me, burying her face against my neck. That was scary, but it's over now. Aunt Vanessa is gone, and she's not coming back without permission. Why is she so angry? Lily's voice was muffled, confused. Why is everyone so angry? I took a breath, searching for words that would make sense to a child without burdening her with the full weight of adult complications. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about things. And sometimes when people are upset, they say things they don't mean, or they act in ways that aren't very kind. But none of that is your fault, and none of it changes how much you're loved. She pulled back to look at me, her hazel eyes so much like my mother's it made my chest ache. "Do you still love Daddy?" The question hung between us, impossibly complicated. "I do," I said carefully, because it was true even if the love had become tangled up with resentment and disappointment and grief for what could have been. But loving someone doesn't always mean you can live with them. Sometimes people need space to figure things out. It was the best answer I could give, and I could see her trying to process it, her small face serious with the effort of understanding something even I didn't fully comprehend yet. We went back to the kitchen, back to the pancakes that had gone cold on the counter, and I reheated them while Lily set the table with careful precision, arranging the forks and knives the way Barbara had taught her, then pausing and rearranging them the way she wanted them instead. We ate slowly, neither of us very hungry, but both of us needing the routine. The normalcy of syrup and butter and orange juice in our favorite glasses. I was just clearing the plates when Nina knocked, her face appearing at the kitchen window with a careful smile, and a paper bag from Bridge City Brew. I let her in gratefully, accepting the coffee she handed me like it was salvation. She'd brought pastries too, still warm, and she sat down at the table with us while Lily picked at a chocolate croissant, and I filled her in on the morning's events in low tones. Vanessa came here? Nina's expression darkened. With her phone out? Recording the whole thing. Trying to bait me into opening the door, probably hoping I'd yell at her or something she could use. Nina pulled out her own phone. Fingers flying across the screen. I'm texting David Chun. He needs to know about this. And we need to get ahead of this legally before they start filing motions. David Chun was the family law attorney Nina had recommended, someone she knew from the hospital who specialized in complex custody cases. I'd sent him an email at 3 a.m. when I couldn't sleep, laying out the basic situation, but I hadn't heard back yet. The idea that this was actually heading toward lawyers and court dates made everything feel suddenly, terrifyingly real. I don't know if I can afford this, I said quietly, aware of Lily's presence even though she was focused on her croissant. Legal fees, fighting them, it's going to drain everything. Nina reached across the table, squeezing my hand. One step at a time. First step is talking to David, understanding what your options are. Second step is documenting everything they're doing. The Facebook post, the threatening texts, Vanessa showing up here this morning, all of it. Third step is protecting yourself and Lily. The money will work itself out. I wanted to believe her, but I'd been managing the household finances long enough to know exactly how tight things were. Without Tyler's income, even the sporadic contributions he'd been making, I was looking at tough decisions. The mortgage payment was due in 2 weeks. The property taxes were coming up. Lily needed new winter boots and her next dental checkup was scheduled for next month. As if reading my thoughts, Nina squeezed my hand tighter. You're not alone in this. I'm here. David's going to help. And you'd be surprised how many people in this neighborhood have been watching what's been going on and haven't been fooled by Barbara's performance. I wanted to believe that too, but Barbara's Facebook post had made it clear which way public opinion was leaning. The comments had continued overnight, growing from 27 to over 100, each one another voice joining the chorus of judgment. I'd read through them during one of my wakeful periods, torturing myself with the assessments of people who'd never spoken to me beyond casual hellos, who were now certain they knew exactly what kind of person I was. My phone, still turned off, sat on the counter like an unexploded bomb. I knew when I turned it back on, there would be more messages, more voicemails, more evidence of how quickly you could become persona non grata in a tight-knit community. Part of me wanted to leave it off forever, to pretend the outside world didn't exist, that we could just stay in this house and be safe. But I couldn't. Lily had school on Monday. I had client deadlines. Real life was going to intrude whether I was ready or not. Nina stayed for another hour, helping me draft responses to the most important emails, showing me how to set up filters so the hate mail would automatically go to a folder I could review later with David rather than flooding my inbox. She helped me change the locks, installing new deadbolts she'd picked up from the hardware store on her way over, making sure that no one who'd had a key before could walk in now. When she finally left, with promises to check in later and plans to have dinner together that evening, I stood in my newly secured house and felt the weight of isolation settle over me. This was what standing your ground looked like in practice. Not some triumphant moment of clarity, but the slow, grinding reality of being cut off, judged, threatened, and somehow having to keep functioning anyway. Lily wanted to watch cartoons, so I set her up in the living room with her favorite blanket, and turned on something cheerful and colorful and utterly removed from our current reality. Then I retreated to my bedroom, closed the door, and turned on my phone. The messages flooded in, notification after notification, the phone buzzing continuously for a full minute. I ignored all of it and went straight to the voicemail from Kenneth Bradshaw, Tyler's attorney. Mrs. Whitmore, this is Kenneth Bradshaw calling on behalf of Tyler Whitmore. I understand there was an incident last night that resulted in my client being removed from the marital residence. I need to inform you that we are immediately filing for emergency custody of the minor child, Lily Whitmore. on the grounds that you have demonstrated unstable and potentially dangerous behavior. We're also pursuing legal action regarding your unlawful exclusion of my client from his home. I strongly suggest you retain counsel immediately. Any further communication should go through your attorney. This is a serious matter, Mrs. Whitmore, and I hope you understand the gravity of what you've initiated. The message ended and I sat there on my bed, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence that followed. Emergency custody. They were going to try to take Lily. They were going to argue that protecting us, that enforcing boundaries, that refusing to be called a freeloader in my own house was evidence that I was unfit. I thought about Lily in the living room, laughing at whatever was happening on the screen, oblivious to the fact that her father's attorney was already building a case to separate us. I thought about Barbara's Facebook post, the carefully constructed narrative of the martyred grandparents thrown out by the unstable daughter-in-law. I thought about Vanessa's phone recording me this morning, collecting evidence, building their story brick by brick. They weren't just angry. They were strategic. And they'd had all night to plan their counterattack while I'd been trying to comfort my daughter and get a few hours of sleep. I called David Chen's office, my hands shaking as I dialed. His receptionist answered, professional and warm. And when I gave my name, I heard her sharp intake of breath. Oh yes, Ms. Whitmore. David's been expecting your call. He read your email this morning. Can you hold for just a moment? The hold music was something classical, Mozart maybe, cheerful and completely at odds with the panic rising in my chest. Then David's voice came on the line, calm and steady and instantly reassuring. Jenna, I'm glad you called. Nina filled me in on some of the details and I've been doing some preliminary research. First thing you need to know is that emergency custody motions are difficult to win, especially when there's no history of abuse or neglect. Tyler's attorney is trying to scare you, but the bar for removing a child from a parent's care is very high. But the Facebook post, I said, my voice cracking. The comments. Everyone thinks I'm unstable. Everyone thinks I threw elderly people out for no reason. Social media isn't a courtroom, David said firmly. And public opinion isn't evidence. What matters is documentation, facts, and the law. From what Nina told me and what you outlined in your email, you're the sole owner of the property, you asked guests to leave who refused, and you called the police when they wouldn't go. That's not unstable behavior. That's appropriate boundary enforcement. I closed my eyes, letting his words sink in, trying to believe them. But they're saying I'm a freeloader. That Tyler supports the family. That I don't contribute. Do you have documentation of your financial contributions? Bank statements, mortgage payments, utility bills? Yes, I said. Everything. I've been paying for everything for months. Years, really, if we're being honest. Tyler hasn't contributed to the mortgage since his last promotion. Then we have a solid case. I want you to come to my office this afternoon if you can. Bring all your financial records, any text messages or emails that show the pattern of behavior from Tyler's family, copies of the deed to your house, anything relevant. We're going to build a comprehensive response to whatever they file, and we're going to make sure the court sees the full picture, not just the story they're trying to tell. We scheduled an appointment for 3 o'clock. After I hung up, I sat for a long moment, trying to steady my breathing, trying to push back the fear that threatened to overwhelm me. Then I got up, went to my office, and started gathering documents. I pulled mortgage statements going back 5 years, showing every payment I'd made, every missed payment that hadn't happened because I'd kept us current. I printed utility bills, property tax receipts, insurance payments. I went through my email and found messages from Barbara asking for money, from Tyler explaining why his paycheck had to go toward investments I'd never seen documentation for. I took screenshots of the threatening texts from the unknown number, of Barbara's Facebook post and all its comments, of Vanessa's message about how I'd lose everything. The documentation pile grew throughout the morning, each piece of paper another brick in the foundation of my defense. Lily came in periodically, asking what I was doing, and I told her I was organizing important papers, keeping my voice light even as I compiled evidence of how thoroughly Tyler's family had gaslit me about my own contributions, my own worth. At noon, Nina came back with lunch, sandwiches from a deli downtown, and sat with us while we ate. She'd printed out something, a list of numbers and names, and she slid it across the table to me. These are people in the neighborhood who've reached out to me. They saw Barbara's post. They don't believe it. They want you to know they support you. I looked at the list, recognizing names. Mrs. Chun from 3 houses down, who'd always waved when I walked Lily to the bus stop. The Johnsons, who'd been at the same HOA meeting where Barbara and Robert had been holding court. Andrea Walsh, whose kids were in Lily's class. There were 15 names total, not a huge number but more than I'd expected. More than enough to make my eyes burn with tears I refused to shed in front of my daughter. They're not all buying what Barbara is selling, Nina said softly. Some people see through it. And more will, once the truth comes out. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and folded the paper. Carefully, tucking it into my purse along with all the other documentation I was bringing to David's office. These names represented something I'd thought I'd lost the moment I'd asked Robert and Barbara to leave. The possibility that I wasn't completely alone, that someone might hear my side and believe it. At 2:30, I loaded Lily into the car, explaining we had to go to a meeting, that Nina was going to stay with her in the waiting room while I talked to a lawyer. Lily's face had gone tight with worry, but she nodded, clutching her stuffed elephant. The drive downtown felt surreal, passing familiar streets and shops, the city going about its normal Saturday business while my life was fracturing into before and after. David's office was in a converted Victorian near the Pearl District, all hardwood floors and tall windows, professional but warm. His receptionist, the same woman I'd spoken to on the phone, smiled kindly at Lily and offered her coloring books and juice. Nina settled into the waiting room with her, pulling out her phone to show Lily some game, and I followed David into his office. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and an easy demeanor that immediately put me at ease. He gestured to a comfortable chair across from his desk, and sat down with a legal pad, ready to take notes. I spread out my documentation on his desk, years of financial records and evidence of the pattern I'd been too close to see clearly. He went through it methodically, asking questions, making notes, occasionally shaking his head, or letting out a low whistle at something particularly egregious. "This is solid," he said finally, sitting back. "This is a clear pattern of financial abuse and manipulation. Tyler hasn't contributed to the mortgage in 14 months. Yet they're claiming you're the freeloader? That's not just false, it's provably false. And you have documentation of everything. Will that matter?" I asked. "In court, will documentation matter more than public opinion?" "In court, yes. Absolutely. But I'm not going to lie to you, Jenna. This is going to be ugly. They're going to try to paint you as unstable, as vindictive, as someone who acts rashly. They're going to use Barbara's social media campaign to try to establish a pattern of what they'll call erratic behavior. But here's what they don't have: evidence. They have opinions and carefully framed narratives. You have facts." He explained the process, what would happen when Tyler filed his emergency custody motion, how we'd respond, what the temporary orders hearing would look like. He outlined the probable timeline, the costs, the realities of what I was facing. It was overwhelming, terrifying, but also somehow grounding. This was real. This was happening. But it was happening within a system with rules and procedures, not just in the court of public opinion where Barbara's tears carried more weight than my truth. "I want to file a protection order against Robert, Barbara, and Vanessa," I said. "For harassment. They're showing up at my house, they're sending threatening messages, they're building a social media campaign against me. I don't feel safe." David nodded, making notes. "We can do that. The harassment is documented, and given that you had to call police to remove them from your property, we have grounds. It won't stop them from talking about you online, unfortunately, but it will legally bar them from contact with you and from coming near your property." "Do it," I said. "Whatever it takes to protect us." We spent another hour going over details, strategies, worst-case scenarios and best-case outcomes. By the time I walked out of David's office, I felt simultaneously more prepared and more terrified than when I'd walked in. This was war, formal and legal and expensive, and I was committed now. There was no going back, no smoothing things over, no pretending it hadn't gotten this bad. Nina looked up when I emerged, reading something in my face. She stood, gathering Lily's things, and we walked out to the parking lot together. Lily held my hand tightly, sensing the weight of whatever had just happened even if she didn't understand the specifics. On the drive home, I watched the city pass by, familiar and suddenly strange, wondering how many of the people in the cars around us, in the shops we passed, had seen Barbara's post. How many of them had formed opinions about me based on her carefully constructed version of events? How many would see me at the grocery store or the gas station and whisper to their companions, recognizing me as the unstable woman who'd thrown her elderly in-laws out into the rain? When we got home, Lily went immediately to her room, exhausted from the emotional weight of the day, and I stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen where just 24 hours earlier I'd been confronting Robert and Barbara, and felt the full reality of what I'd set in motion settle over me like a heavy coat. My phone rang, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe to accept. A woman's voice came through, tentative and kind. "Ms. Whitmore? This is Patricia Hammond, Lily's teacher. I hope I'm not overstepping, but I saw what's been posted online, and I wanted you to know that in all my years of teaching, I've never seen a more devoted mother. Lily talks about you constantly. She's clearly loved and cared for. Whatever is happening with your family, I hope you know that some of us see you, and we see the truth of who you are." I stood in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, and finally let the tears come. "Thank you," I managed. "You have no idea how much that means." After we hung up, I slid down to sit on the floor, my back against the cabinets, and cried properly for the first time since this had all started. Not the careful, quiet tears I'd been allowing myself in private moments, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from someplace primal, releasing the fear and hurt and overwhelming weight of it all. When I finally stopped, when the tears dried and I could breathe normally again, I got up and washed my face and went to check on Lily. She was asleep on her bed, the stuffed elephant tucked under her chin, and I stood in her doorway watching her for a long moment. This was what I was fighting for. Not the house, not my reputation, not even my marriage at this point. This little girl, who deserved to grow up knowing her mother hadn't backed down when things got hard, who deserved to see that boundaries were healthy, that standing up for yourself was possible even when it cost everything. I pulled out my phone and opened my email, navigating past all the hate mail to find the client messages I'd been neglecting. I responded to each one professionally, letting them know I was dealing with a family emergency, but would be back on schedule by Monday. Then I opened my laptop and finished the logo design I'd been working on when this had all started, sending it off to the client with an invoice attached. Life went on. The world kept turning. Bills still needed to be paid. And I was still here, still standing, still fighting. Sunday morning arrived with rain drumming against the windows, the kind of persistent Oregon drizzle that turned the world gray and made everything feel heavier. I woke to find Lily already awake beside me, staring at the ceiling with an expression too serious for a 7-year-old. When she noticed my eyes open, she turned to me with a question that made my heart clench. "Is Daddy ever coming home?" I pulled her close, buying myself a moment to formulate an answer that was honest but not crushing. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. Right now, Daddy and I need some time apart to figure things out. But no matter what happens between us, he loves you very much, and so do I." She nodded against my chest, but I could feel the tension in her small body, the worry she was trying to be brave about. We lay there for a while, listening to the rain, before finally getting up to face whatever the day would bring. My phone had been buzzing intermittently since dawn, but I'd been ignoring it, not ready to deal with whatever fresh crisis awaited. When I finally checked it while Lily was brushing her teeth, I found a series of increasingly aggressive messages from Tyler himself, the first direct contact I'd had from him since the police escorted him out Friday night. The first message was almost reasonable. "We need to talk. This has gotten out of hand." The second was less so. "You can't just destroy our family because you had a bad day." By the fourth message, sent at 2 in the morning, the mask had fully slipped. "You're going to pay for this. My lawyer is going to tear you apart. You'll be lucky if you get supervised visitation when this is over." But it was the final message, sent just 20 minutes ago, that made my blood run cold. "I'm coming to get my things today. I'll be there at noon. You can either let me in peacefully, or I'll have the police escort me. Either way, I'm getting what's mine." I checked the time. 11:15. He'd be here in 45 minutes. and I had no legal grounds to stop him from collecting his belongings. Even though the idea of him in this house again made my skin crawl. I immediately texted David Chun, explaining the situation, and his response came back within minutes. Let him collect his things, but have a witness present. Record everything. Don't be alone with him. If he tries to take anything that's clearly yours or jointly owned, document it but don't physically intervene. I called Nina, who answered on the first ring. I need you. Tyler's coming to get his things, and I can't be alone with him. She didn't hesitate. I'm coming now. Don't let him in until I get there. I told Lily we were going to have a visitor, that Daddy was coming to pick up some of his clothes and things, trying to keep my voice neutral even as anxiety twisted in my stomach. Her face lit up with hope that broke my heart. Is he staying? Is he coming back? No, baby. He's just getting some things he needs. Aunt Nina is coming over too, so we'll have company. The hope dimmed, replaced by that too serious expression again. She went to her room without another word, and I heard her close the door softly, retreating into whatever private space children create when the adult world becomes too much. Nina arrived at 11:40, her presence immediately steadying. She had her phone ready to record in a calm, determined expression that reminded me why I'd called her first on Friday night, when everything had fallen apart. We stood in the living room, waiting, listening to the rain and the ticking of my mother's old grandfather clock. Tyler's car pulled up at exactly noon. I watched through the window as he sat there for a moment, probably steeling himself, before getting out and walking to the door with purposeful strides. He knocked, 3 sharp raps, and I took a deep breath before opening it. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair uncombed, his clothes rumpled like he'd slept in them. For a moment, I felt a pang of something like sympathy, remembering the man I'd married, before his expression hardened, and I remembered why we were here. I'm here for my things, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. I know. You can come in, but Nina's here as a witness, and I'm recording. Take only what's yours. His jaw tightened. This is my house too, Jenna. You don't get to set conditions. This house is in my name only. Oregon isn't a community property state for premarital assets. David explained it all very clearly. You can collect your personal belongings, but that's it. He pushed past me without responding, Nina immediately pulling out her phone to start recording. I followed him upstairs to our bedroom, the room where we'd slept beside each other for 8 years, where we'd made love and had fights and shared quiet mornings before Lily woke up. Now it felt like foreign territory, claimed and contested. Tyler pulled a duffel bag from the closet and started throwing clothes into it with aggressive movements. Suits, shirts, ties all wadded up without care. He grabbed toiletries from the bathroom, swept his nightstand clean of books and charging cables, worked with a manic energy that suggested he wanted to be done as quickly as possible. Then he went to the dresser, the antique piece my mother had refinished, and started opening drawers. He pulled out more clothes, then paused at the bottom drawer where we kept important documents. I watched him rifle through papers, saw him pocket something, and stepped forward. What did you just take? He turned, his face flushed. Nothing that's yours. Just some documents I need. Tyler, what documents? I need to know what you're taking from this house. His hand went to his pocket protectively. It's none of your business. These are my papers. Nina moved closer, phone still recording. Everything that happens here is being documented, Tyler. If you're taking something that belongs to Jenna or is jointly owned, we need to know. His expression cycled through several emotions, anger, defensiveness, something that might have been guilt, before he pulled out a manila envelope and threw it on the bed. Fine. It's the deed to my parents' old house. They signed it over to me before they sold it. It's proof of the inheritance I was supposed to get, the one they had to give up because they lost money on that sale. I stared at the envelope, then at him. They lost money because they overpriced it and refused to negotiate. That has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with you, he snapped. If they hadn't had to move in here, if you'd been more welcoming, more accommodating, they could have taken their time, gotten a better offer. But you made it so uncomfortable they had to rush, had to take a loss. That money was supposed to be mine, and your attitude cost me. The revisionist history was breathtaking. They'd sold their house because they wanted to, because they'd convinced themselves they could live with us temporarily while they looked for something better, then gradually made themselves permanent fixtures while contributing nothing. The market price they'd gotten was fair, probably generous considering the repairs the place needed. But in Tyler's version, their choice to move in had somehow been my fault, and the natural consequences of that choice were my responsibility. That's not what happened, I said quietly. And you know it. He grabbed the envelope and shoved it back in his pocket, returning to his packing with renewed aggression. He pulled open my jewelry box, the small wooden one my grandmother had given my mother, and started going through it. Tyler, that's mine. My voice came out sharper than I intended. You have my grandmother's ring in here. He held up a simple gold band, one I'd never seen before. She gave it to me years ago. It's mine. I'd never seen that ring in my jewelry box. Never seen him put it there, never known it existed. But the way he held it, the defensive set of his shoulders, made me suspect he was planting evidence, creating justification for going through my things. Nina zoomed in on the ring with her phone, capturing the moment clearly. Take it, I said. But nothing else from that box belongs to you. He pocketed the ring and slammed the jewelry box shut, but not before I saw his eyes linger on my mother's pearl earrings, the ones she'd worn to my wedding. He wanted to take something else, wanted to hurt me by claiming pieces of my history, but Nina's recording phone stopped him. The packing continued in tense silence, Tyler moving through the room like a storm, opening cabinets and drawers with more force than necessary. He went to the closet and pulled down a box from the top shelf, one I'd forgotten was there. When he opened it, I saw photos spill out, pictures from our wedding, from Lily's birth, from holidays and vacations, all the documented moments of a life we'd built together. He started to put the entire box in his duffel, and I stepped forward. Those are copies. The originals are in my photo albums. You can take your copies but not my albums. These are my memories too, he said, but there was something broken in his voice now. Something that suggested he was finally realizing what he was losing. I know. That's why you can have copies. But the albums were made by me, organized by me, and they're staying here. He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw him really look at me for what felt like the first time in years. Saw him take in my unwavering stance, Nina's presence beside me, the phone recording every moment, and perhaps understand that this wasn't going to end the way he'd expected. I wasn't going to back down. Wasn't going to be convinced I was overreacting. Wasn't going to accept the blame for the collapse of something we'd both broken. You've changed, he said finally, and it sounded like an accusation. No, I replied. I just stopped pretending to be smaller than I am. He pulled out a stack of photos, left the albums, and continued packing. When he moved toward Lily's room, I blocked his path. No. You don't go in there without her permission. If there's something specific you need from her room, I'll ask her and bring it to you. I want to see my daughter, he said, his voice rising. You can't keep her from me. I'm not keeping her from you. But you're here to collect belongings, not to have a visit. If you want to see Lily, we can arrange that through our attorneys with proper structure and boundaries. His face went red, that vein in his temple pulsing. You're poisoning her against me. You're using her as a weapon. I'm protecting her from witnessing her father ransack our home while angry. If you want a relationship with her, you can do it in a way that doesn't traumatize her. For a moment, I thought he might lose control entirely, might start yelling or throwing things, but Nina stepped forward slightly, phone still recording, and he seemed to remember himself. He turned on his heel and went back to the bedroom, grabbed his now full duffel bag, and headed for the stairs. At the bottom he paused, his hand on the doorknob. You're going to regret this, Jenna. All of it. My lawyer is filing the custody petition tomorrow. You'll be lucky if you get weekends. Then I guess we'll see what a judge thinks about a father who hasn't paid the mortgage in over a year, while calling the mother a freeloader. His hand tightened on the doorknob. The house might be in your name, but I supported this family in other ways. Ways you'll never understand or appreciate. Like what? I genuinely wanted to know. Like what ways, Tyler? Because I have bank statements showing I paid for everything. I have records of every expense, every contribution. So please, tell me what ways you supported us that I'm not seeing. He had no answer. Or perhaps he had an answer he knew would sound hollow when said aloud. He pulled open the door, letting in the sound of rain and the gray light of the overcast afternoon. The custody hearing is in 2 weeks, he said without turning around. My lawyer will bury you. And when I have full custody, when Lily's living with me and my parents, maybe then you'll understand what you threw away. He walked out, got in his car, and drove away, leaving me standing in the doorway with Nina beside me and the echo of his threats hanging in the air. I closed the door and locked it, then leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. Nina stopped recording and wrapped an arm around my shoulders. You did great. You stayed calm, you documented everything, you didn't let him bait you. He took something, I said. From the documents drawer. I couldn't see what, but there was something else besides that envelope. Nina pulled out her phone, reviewing the footage. Let me check. We got everything on video. We went to the kitchen table, and she played back the recording, zooming in on the moment Tyler had gone through the drawer. There, just visible before he'd shown us the envelope, was another document, something he'd folded and put in his other pocket. Nina paused the video, enhanced it as much as her phone would allow, and we could just make out letterhead. Oregon Health Authority. What would he have from the health department? Nina asked. My mind raced through possibilities, then landed on something that made my stomach drop. My mother's death certificate. I kept it in that drawer with other important papers. The original. Why would he take that? I don't know. But I don't like it. I pulled out my phone and texted David Chin the information, attaching the screenshot Nina had captured. His response came quickly. That's concerning. We'll address it in our filings. Keep the video evidence secure. Lily emerged from her room then, her face hopeful and heartbroken at the same time. Did Daddy leave already? I knelt down, pulling her into a hug. Yeah, baby. He came to get some of his clothes. He had to go. She didn't cry, but I felt her small body sag against mine, disappointment settling over her like a weight. We stayed like that for a long moment, me and my daughter and Nina in our kitchen. The rain still falling outside, the house feeling simultaneously emptier, and somehow safer now that Tyler's presence had been removed. That evening, after Nina left and Lily was in bed, I sat at my laptop going through files, trying to figure out what Tyler might do with my mother's death certificate. It was just a legal document, proof of death, necessary for settling estates and transferring property. Unless he planned to use it to claim some kind of ownership interest in the house, to argue that the inheritance should have been joint property somehow. My phone rang, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A woman's voice came through, older, unfamiliar, with a slight tremor that suggested either age or distress. Is this Jenna Whitmore? Yes, who is this? My name is Eleanor Harrison. I'm Robert's sister. I understand there's been some trouble between you and the family. I sat up straighter, instantly wary. If this was another person calling to tell me what a terrible daughter-in-law I wasn't interested. I'm not discussing family matters with people I don't know. I understand, she said quickly. And I'm not calling to take sides. I'm calling because I've known Barbara for 30 years, and I've watched what she does to people. I've watched her do it to Robert's first wife, to Vanessa's husband, and now I see her doing it to you. And I thought you should know you're not crazy, and you're not wrong. The words hit me like a physical thing, validation from an unexpected source. I gripped the phone tighter. What do you mean his first wife? Robert was married before Barbara. A woman named Christine. Lovely person, kind, hardworking. Barbara hated her from the start, said she wasn't good enough for the family. She ran a campaign, subtle at first and then increasingly aggressive, until Christine felt so isolated and attacked that she left. Robert married Barbara less than a year later. And I've always suspected that was Barbara's goal all along. I processed this, pieces clicking into place. So she has a pattern of identifying women she sees as threats and systematically destroying them. Exactly. And she's good at it. She knows how to use social pressure, how to manipulate narratives, how to make herself look like the victim while she's actually the aggressor. I've seen her do it multiple times over the years. When Vanessa's husband Greg started standing up to her, Barbara nearly destroyed their marriage. The only reason they survived was because Greg finally gave in and let Barbara have her way. Why are you telling me this? Because someone should have told Christine. Someone should have warned her that it wasn't in her head, that Barbara was deliberately orchestrating her isolation. And because I saw that Facebook post, and I recognized the playbook immediately. Barbara's doing to you what she did to Christine, and I couldn't stay silent this time. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of this information settle over me. Do you have any proof? Anything that could help me show the pattern? I have letters, she said. From Christine from years ago, describing what Barbara did to her. I kept them because I felt guilty for not doing more to help. I'd be willing to share them with your lawyer if you think they'd be useful. They would be. Very useful. Thank you for calling, Eleanor. You have no idea what this means. After we hung up, I sat in the dark living room, my mother's house quiet around me, and felt something shift. I wasn't alone in recognizing what Barbara was. I wasn't the first woman she'd tried to break. And if Eleanor's letters showed a clear pattern of this behavior, it could be powerful evidence that what was happening to me wasn't about my failures or instability, but about Barbara's need for control. I texted David the information, and his response was immediate. This is huge. Get me those letters as soon as possible. Then I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do since Friday night. I let myself imagine a future where I won, where the court saw through Barbara's manipulation, where Tyler's custody petition failed, where Lily and I stayed in this house and built a life without the constant weight of judgment and criticism. It felt impossible, fragile as a soap bubble, but for the first time, it also felt possible. The rain continued through the night, washing the streets clean, and I fell asleep on the couch with my laptop still open, dreaming of courtrooms and justice and the fierce determination of women who refused to be erased. Monday morning came with the sharp awareness that real life was resuming whether I was ready or not. Lily needed to get to school, I had client deadlines that couldn't wait any longer, and the world outside this house was going to have opinions about what had happened regardless of whether I engaged with them. I got Lily ready with extra care, making sure her clothes were neat, her hair brushed smooth, her lunch packed with all her favorites. I knew that some of the other parents had probably seen Barbara's Facebook post, that there might be whispers at drop-off, that Lily might face questions from friends whose parents had filled them in on the neighborhood drama. I wanted her to walk into that school feeling as secure as possible. The drive to Glencoe Elementary was quiet, Lily staring out the window at the wet streets still glistening from yesterday's rain. When we pulled into the parking lot, I saw clusters of parents at the entrance, their heads bent together in conversation. Several looked up as we approached, and I watched the recognition cross their faces, followed by a range of reactions from curiosity to judgment to what might have been sympathy. I held Lily's hand as we walked toward the entrance, keeping my head up even as I felt the weight of their stares. Mrs. Hammond was standing by the door, greeting students as they arrived, and when she saw us, her face broke into a warm smile that felt like a lifeline. "Good morning, Lily." "Good morning, Ms. Whitmore." She directed the greeting to me specifically, loudly enough for the nearby parents to hear. A small act of solidarity that I felt in my bones. "Good morning," I replied, squeezing Lily's hand before letting her go. "Have a good day, sweetheart." Lily looked up at me with worried eyes, clearly sensing the tension in the air. "You'll be here to pick me up?" "I'll be right here. Same spot, same time. I promise." She nodded and headed inside, Mrs. Hammond placing a gentle hand on her shoulder as she passed. I turned to walk back to my car, and nearly collided with a woman I recognized from the PTA, Amanda Cho, who'd always been friendly in a surface-level way at school events. "Jenna, wait." Her voice was low, urgent. "I just wanted to say that not everyone believes what's being said online. Some of us know there are always two sides." I looked at her, searching for judgment or pity, but found only genuine concern. "Thank you. That means more than you know. If you need anything," she said, pressing a piece of paper into my hand. "That's my number. Sometimes it helps to know you're not completely alone." I clutched the paper as I walked to my car, blinking back tears I refused. Shed in the school parking lot. Once inside with the door closed, I unfolded it and saw not just her number but 3 other names and numbers written below it. "Parents who want you to know we're here," the note said. The drive home felt different somehow. The weight slightly lighter even as I knew the real battles were still ahead. I had work to do, calls to make, evidence to organize, but first I needed to understand something that had been nagging at me since Eleanor's phone call. I needed to trace back the pattern, to see clearly how Barbara had orchestrated this from the beginning. I made coffee and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop, pulling up my email archive. I searched for messages from Barbara, from Tyler's family, starting from when Tyler and I first got serious about 8 years ago. The early emails were sparse, surface-level pleasantries about meeting for dinner or holiday plans. But I found the shift, the moment when the tone changed. It was 6 years ago, right around the time Tyler and I got engaged. Barbara had sent an email with the subject line, "Wedding planning thoughts," that I'd completely forgotten about. Reading it now with clear eyes, I saw the manipulation embedded in every carefully worded sentence. The email had started warmly enough, congratulating us on the engagement, expressing excitement about the upcoming wedding. Then it had shifted. "I've been thinking about venues, and I know you'll want something that reflects both families appropriately. The country club where we're members would be perfect, very elegant, very proper. I know it might be above what you're used to, but Tyler deserves a wedding that matches his status. Don't worry about the cost, we can help with that, though of course you'll want to contribute what you can." I remembered how that email had made me feel, the subtle sting of being told the places I could afford weren't good enough, that I needed their help to give Tyler a wedding that matched his status. But I'd swallowed the hurt because I'd wanted the wedding to be special, wanted to make a good impression on his family. I scrolled further and found my response, painfully eager to please. "Thank you so much for thinking of us. The country club sounds beautiful, though I'd also love to look at a few other options. My mother and I have always loved the Rose Garden, and there's a small historic inn outside the city that does lovely weddings. Maybe we could visit a few places together?" Barbara's response had come within an hour. "The Rose Garden is lovely for tourists, but for a wedding? A bit common, don't you think? And I'm not familiar with the inn you mentioned. Is it reputable? You have to remember, dear, that Tyler's colleagues and our social circle will be attending. First impressions matter so much in his career. Let me make an appointment at the country club. I'm sure once you see it, you'll understand why it's the right choice." I'd gone to see the country club. It had been beautiful, undeniably elegant with its manicured grounds and crystal chandeliers. It had also been $15,000 more than my budget, even with the contribution my mother had painstakingly saved. I remembered standing in that grand ballroom, feeling small and out of place, while Barbara painted pictures of how perfect everything would be. Tyler had been no help. When I'd expressed concern about the cost, he'd shrugged and said his mom just wanted things to be nice, that we could figure out the money somehow, that I was overthinking it. So I'd agreed, and my mother had quietly depleted her savings, and I'd worked extra freelance hours for 6 months to cover my share, and we'd had a wedding at the country club that had been beautiful and expensive and exactly what Barbara wanted. I found photos from that day in my cloud storage, scrolling through images I hadn't looked at in years. There was Barbara in her mother-of-the-groom dress, a stunning champagne-colored gown that had probably cost more than my wedding dress, holding court among the guests. There was Robert, beaming with pride, toasting his son in a speech that barely mentioned me. There was Vanessa, elegant in her bridesmaid dress, though she'd complained about the color I'd chosen, saying it washed her out. And there, in the background of several shots, was my mother, wearing a simple dress she'd bought on sale, smiling bravely even though I knew she was in pain. The cancer already spreading though we didn't know it yet. She'd spent her savings on a wedding that wasn't even what I'd wanted, at a venue chosen by a woman who'd subtly made it clear I wasn't quite good enough. And she'd done it with grace and love, because that's who she was. I closed my laptop, overwhelmed by the clarity of it all. That wedding had been the template, the first major event where Barbara had established her dominance, where she'd shown me that my preferences didn't matter as much as maintaining appearances for Tyler's benefit. And I'd gone along with it, had convinced myself it was compromise, that it was what you did for family. My phone rang, jarring me from the spiral of memories. It was Eleanor Harrison, Robert's sister. I answered immediately. "Jenna, I have the letters from Christine. I've scanned them all. Can I email them to you and your lawyer?" "Yes, please. That would be incredibly helpful." "There's something else," she said, her voice hesitant. "I spoke with Christine last night. It took me a while to find her. She's remarried now, living in Seattle. But she remembers everything Barbara did, and she's willing to testify if it comes to that. She said she wished someone had validated her experience back then, and she wants to help you now. I pressed my hand to my mouth, emotion threatening to overwhelm me. Why? Why would she do that for a stranger? Because she knows what it's like, Eleanor said simply. And because she doesn't want Barbara to win again. After we hung up, I sat with that information, feeling the weight and gift of it. A woman I'd never met, who'd survived Barbara's campaign of destruction decades ago, was willing to stand up and be counted now. It was solidarity across time, across experience, proof that I wasn't imagining the pattern, wasn't overreacting to normal family dynamics. The emails from Eleanor arrived 20 minutes later, a dozen scanned letters dating back 30 years. I read through them with growing recognition, seeing my own experience reflected in Christine's careful handwriting. She described dinner parties where Barbara had criticized her cooking, her clothes, her background. She wrote about how Robert had slowly stopped defending her, how Tyler, just a child then, had been used as a pawn to make her feel inadequate as a stepmother. She detailed the social isolation, the whisper campaigns, the way Barbara had positioned herself as the concerned family member, while systematically destroying Christine's reputation. The final letter, written just before Christine left, was the most devastating. I can't do this anymore, she'd written to Eleanor. I've lost myself trying to be what they want, trying to prove I'm worthy of being in this family. But I'll never be enough for Barbara, and Robert will never choose me over her. So I'm choosing myself, even though it means losing everything else. I hope someday I'll be able to forgive myself for not being stronger, for not fighting harder. But right now, I just need to survive. I forwarded everything to David Chun with a message. This is the pattern. This is proof it's not just me. His response came quickly. This is exactly what we need. Between this and Eleanor's willingness to testify, we can show that Barbara has a documented history of this behavior. It transforms the narrative from unstable daughter-in-law to repeated pattern of familial abuse. I spent the rest of the morning working, forcing myself to focus on client projects, to create logos and design layouts, to be professional and reliable even as my personal life was in chaos. Around noon, Nina texted asking if I wanted lunch, and I realized I hadn't eaten anything since a piece of toast at breakfast. She arrived with sandwiches and the kind of determined cheerfulness that told me she was worried about me. We ate at the kitchen table, and I filled her in on Eleanor's call, on Christine's letters, on the wedding planning emails I'd rediscovered. Nina shook her head, anger flashing in her eyes. She's been grooming you from the start, getting you to accept that your choices didn't matter, that her version of things was the correct version. It's textbook manipulation. I know that now, but at the time, I just thought I was compromising, being flexible, choosing my battles. That's what makes it so insidious, Nina said. She makes you think it's your choice, your decision to give in. But really, she's engineered a situation where any other choice feels impossible. My phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Kenneth Bradshaw, Tyler's attorney, with a subject line that made my stomach drop. Emergency custody petition filed. I opened it with shaking hands and scanned the contents. Tyler had officially filed for emergency custody of Lily, claiming I had demonstrated erratic, unstable behavior including wrongful eviction of family members, harassment via police intervention, and alienation of the child from her father and extended family. The hearing was scheduled for Friday, 4 days away. Attached was a declaration from Barbara, a sworn statement describing me as mentally unstable, financially irresponsible, and emotionally abusive. She claimed she and Robert had moved in to help stabilize the household, that they'd contributed financially, that they'd been caring for Lily while I neglected my duties. Every word was a lie, carefully constructed, sworn under oath. There was also a declaration from Vanessa, describing the scene on Saturday morning when she'd come to collect her parents' belongings, claiming I'd been hostile, aggressive, and had threatened her. The video Nina had taken told a completely different story, but Vanessa's written account painted me as unhinged. Nina read over my shoulder, her anger palpable. This is perjury. They're lying under oath. I know. But it's their word against mine, at least until Friday. Not anymore, Nina said firmly. You have Eleanor's letters, Christine's testimony, bank records, Nina's video. My recording from Friday night. You have evidence. They just have lies. I forwarded everything to David with a message that probably seemed calmer than I felt. They've filed. I'm ready to fight. His response was immediate. Don't worry. We've got this. I'm filing our response today, and it's going to be comprehensive. Trust the process. Trust the process. I desperately wanted to believe that truth would win, that evidence would matter more than performance, that a judge would see through Barbara's tears and Tyler's wounded dignity to the reality underneath. But I'd spent 6 years watching Barbara manipulate situations, watching people believe her version of events because she was so good at playing the victim. The afternoon stretched ahead with the weight of waiting, of knowing that in 4 days, I'd be standing in a courtroom while someone tried to take my daughter. I couldn't work, couldn't focus, so I did the only thing that made sense. I started preparing our home for whatever came next, organizing documents, creating systems, making sure that if the worst happened, if somehow they won, I'd have everything I needed to appeal, to keep fighting. Because that's what my mother had taught me, what my grandmother had modeled. You didn't give up. You didn't let people who wanted to break you succeed. You stood your ground, you used whatever tools you had, and you fought for what mattered. And nothing mattered more than Lily. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.